Okay, today I'm going to read from Aliens Ate My Homework, chapters 19 and 20. And I believe 20 is the last chapter, and then we will have finished the book. So where we left off yesterday, the Furkle had expanded to full size in BKR's house. So now we are on chapter 19, Sick Bay. After a moment, a ramp extended from the side of the Furkle. Snout, now full size, stepped out and called, "Rod! Rod, where are you?" "Here," I cried, flashing down to hover in front of him. As I floated there, I had a sense that something about the alien wasn't quite as I had expected, but I couldn't figure out what it was. "Thank goodness, you're all right," he said. "Quick, fly over by that tree so Phil can enlarge you." I shot off in the direction he pointed. Almost instantly, an orange ray shot out from the top of the ship. I could see that it came from the device I had installed, which was now several times larger than me. The world spun. For an instant, I blacked out. When I opened my eyes again, I was still floating about 3 feet above the ground, but now I was my regular size. I flew back to Snout. That was when I realized what had been bothering me before. He stood only a few inches higher than my belly button. "Did the enlarger malfunction?" I asked. He flapped his snout at me. "No, this is our regular size. We don't have time to talk about that now. We have to find Gracker and BKR and get out of here. I'm bonded to Gracker, so I should be able to locate him with my mind. But if he is unconscious or..." He stopped and cleared his throat. "If he is unconscious, it will be more difficult. You look for BKR." I nodded and started to fly in a circle above the wreckage. Though I was looking for BKR, I spotted Gracker first, or at least the lunchbox that I thought held him. It was nearly flat. A tiny green arm hung from one side of it, my heart thudding with terror. I landed and gently picked up the box. I didn't dare open it. "Snout!" I cried. "Over here! Quick!" He rushed to my side. When he saw the crushed box, the dangling arm, his eyes went wide and he looked so sad. I nearly began to cry myself. Without saying a word, he took the box tenderly from my hands. "Find BKR," he said. Then he turned and headed for the ship. It took me another 2 or 3 minutes to locate our enemy. He was lying in a pile of rubble about 50 feet from the ship. His eyes were closed and he looked badly battered. Remembering that the anti-gravity function of the belt would extend to anything I carried, I swooped down and picked him up and sailed into the ship. "Good," said Phil when he saw me come through the door. "Now let's get out of here before anyone sees us." He pulled in the ramp and the Furkle soared into the atmosphere. Snout appeared at my side almost instantly. "Bring the enemy this way," he said. As I followed him from the control room, I had to duck my head to fit through the doorway. We went to an elevator, which quickly transported us to what had to be the ship's version of the nurse's office at school. Sick Bay was what Snout called it. Madame Pong and Tar Gibbons were already there, each lying on a table. Above the tables hung silvery domes from which emanated a soft blue light. Like Snout, Madame Pong and Tar Gibbons appeared to be only about 3 feet tall, though it was harder to judge precisely with them lying down. Madame Pong wrinkled her nose when she saw me. "You did well, Rod," she whispered. "Thank you," I said softly, scared by the weakness in her voice. I wanted to go to her, but I had to get rid of BKR. "Place him here," said Snout, indicating another of the healing tables. When I laid BKR down, Snout strapped him to the table. Then he switched on the blue light. I went to stand beside Madame Pong. "Are you all right?" I asked. She closed her hand over mine. "I will be before long. These healing tables are most effective. Our main concern now is for our fallen companion, Captain Gracker," added Tar Gibbons. "Where is Gracker?" I asked as a lump wedged itself in my throat. Madame Pong made a small gesture. "Over there." I looked where she was pointing and saw Snout standing beside a 4th table. When I went to join him, he leaned his head against my elbow and sighed. The lunchbox was open now. Inside lay the motionless form of Captain Gracker. Next to him was poor, tiny Plink, no bigger than the last joint on my pinky finger. I reached toward them, then drew my hand back. as I watched Gracker's eyes fluttered open. Bad wall, he whispered. Bad Krieger. Then he tried to struggle to his feet. Snout smiled and burst into tears. He's going to be all right, he whispered. The aliens stayed at my house that night. They shrank the ship again, which made me kind of nervous, but Phil assured us all that now that they had the missing FD Gizmo, it would be no problem to enlarge it. Things were pretty tense on the home front. Mom was furious with me for skipping school. I told her the truth. The bullying had gotten so bad that I just couldn't go that day. I just didn't say who's bullying. We were still arguing about it when the phone rang. My mother picked it up, and by the way, her face fell. I could tell it was bad news. Yes, Mr. Markle, she said. I'll talk to him this evening. Hanging up, she made a face. That was Arnie's father. He's still talking about a lawsuit. I don't know what we're going to... She paused, turned away. When she turned back, her face was calm. Don't worry about it, Rod, she said. I appreciated the sentiment, but not worrying about it was not one of my options. Before I could think of anything to say, the phone rang again. Mom moaned and picked up the receiver. I started to leave, but she motioned me back into the room. She listened for a minute, and if she had looked worried when Mr. Markle called, the look on her face now was of panic and disbelief. After a minute, she put her hand over the receiver and whispered, Rod, were you near the Becker house today? Eyes wide, I nodded. She closed her eyes and took a deep breath. After a second, she said, The police want to talk to you. The sergeant who came into the house was firm but kind. I could tell he didn't want to believe I had had anything to do with the explosion. I could also tell that he was afraid it would turn out that I had. Is it true that you skipped school today, young man? Yes, sir. And did you go over to the Becker house when you should have been in school? Yes, sir. Now, why would you do a thing like that? I can hardly remember the story I concocted. Something about wanting to talk to Mrs. Becker to see if she could do anything about the way Billy was bullying me. I think it made sense, though I couldn't swear to it. It was a good thing I had broken through my barrier about lying, because that wasn't the last whopper I had to tell before the interview was over. When the sergeant asked me if I had seen anything suspicious, I swallowed hard and lied again. So far, I thought I was doing pretty well, but his next question really scared me. Is it true that you've been working on a volcano for your science project? No point in telling a lie on that one. Everyone in my class knew that I had been making. Yes, sir. And it was really going to erupt? Yes, sir. So you've been learning about explosives? Now see here, officer, said my mother. He waved his hand at her to be quiet. I was just going to use vinegar and baking soda, I said meekly. Well, that's about it for now, he said, folding his notebook. If you think of anything else I should know, give me a call. It was clear that by anything else, he meant if I wanted to confess to having blown up the Becker house. My mother showed him to the door. When he was gone, she came back and looked at me. Rod, do you know anything about what happened to the Becker house? Yes, Mom, I do, I said. Something you didn't tell the officer? Yes. What? I sighed. I might have been able to lie to BKR. I might have been able to lie to the police, but I still couldn't lie to her. Well, it blew up when a miniature-sized alien spaceship that was trapped inside the house expanded to its full size. Rod, this is no laughing matter. What happened today is very serious. I think you'd better go to your room, young man. I'm very disappointed in you. The taste of dry chocolate cookie heavy in my mouth, I sighed and trudged to my room. What's wrong, Rod? Asked Snout when he saw me come in. He was sitting on the edge of my science project. We had figured this was a good place for the aliens to hang out. Since I hadn't finished repairing the hole, if we heard anyone coming, they could scramble through it and hide inside the volcano. Everything, I said bitterly. You guys have completed your mission, but my life is going right into the toilet. My mother is furious at me for skipping school today. And since I was out of school when it happened, our local police think I was the one who blew up the Becker house. Not to mention the fact that my science project still has a big hole in it. I've been meaning to ask you about the project, Rod, said Phil. How exactly were you planning to get it to school? In my mother's car, I said, wondering what in the world he was talking about. And how were you going to get it in her car? Well, the two of us would pick it up and I stopped as I realized what he was talking about. The volcano wasn't sturdy enough to be tipped sideways, and it was at least a foot too wide to go through the door. It was a small thing, really, but it was the last straw. With a scream of despair, I threw myself onto my bed and I buried my head under my pillow. I only meant to stay there for a minute, but suddenly everything, the lack of sleep, the wild adventures, the danger and drama, caught up with me. I felt myself drifting into a sleep I couldn't seem to resist. Even now, I don't know whether that sleep came from sheer exhaustion or from Snout practicing his mental arts on me. Either way, it was deep and satisfying, but not nearly as satisfying as the next day, which was in a lot of ways the best day of my life, except for the part that was the worst. So that was chapter 19. I wonder what it could be. Okay, chapter 20, last chapter of the book. A visit from Mr. Becker. The first thing I saw when I woke up was my volcano sitting next to me on my pillow. It was small enough to fit in the palm of my hand. Not only that, the hole was fixed and the entire thing had been beautifully decorated. Wow, I cried. What good is having a shrinking ray if you can't use it to help a friend? Burped Phil. He was on my nightstand. His pot floated 1/4 of an inch or so above the surface. I could see Plink climbing around inside his branches. And wait till you see it erupt, said Tar Gibbons. We've added a few special effects. This is great, I said, hoping their special effects wouldn't convince the police that I was indeed the one who had blown up the Becker place. It is no more than you have earned, said Madame Pong. Directive 479.8.4.3.9 of the Galactic Code specifies that those who assist in operations of the GP should be rewarded for their efforts, said Gracker stiffly. I was delighted to see the little guy up and around again. I carried the volcano to the car before Mom was even awake. Phil flew the Ferkel and its enlarger ray around to meet us. I'd suggest we take it to about 85% of original size, said Snout. That should make it easier to move around. It fit easily into the trunk. This is great, guys, I said. I don't suppose you have any advice for me on how to deal with Arnie. Madame Pong smiled. Just go to school and have a good day, Rod, she said. But her smile grew even broader. I can almost guarantee it will be a good day, she said. And that was all I could get out of her. Mom drove me in the volcano to school. The silence in the car was deafening. She didn't speak until we were in the school parking lot. Rod, about Arnie, she started. Don't worry, I said, hoping the aliens wouldn't make a liar out of me. I'll take care of it. I had hoped for some reaction to the volcano when I brought it into the classroom, but people were so wound up talking about the explosion at the Becker house that they barely noticed it. About the only one who said anything was Arnie Markle. He walked over, making a point to show me the big cast on his hand, and said, Great volcano, Albright. I can't wait to see it go off. Where's that little guy you're supposed to give me? Before I could answer, the classroom door swung open. To my astonishment, Billy Becker's father, or more precisely, the android Billy had used as his fake father, walked in. Good morning, Mr. Becker, said Miss Maloney nervously. I was so sorry to hear about the terrible tragedy at your house yesterday afternoon. Is Billy all right? He's fine, Miss Maloney, said Mr. Becker. I wonder if it would be all right if I addressed the class for a moment. She furrowed her brow, but then said, Be my guest. Thank you, said the android. Then it turned to face us. I feel I must apologize to all of you for the things you have suffered at my son's hands over the last several months. He is a very troubled boy. As you know, there was an accident at our home yesterday, and it was destroyed. I have heard some speculation that Rod Albright might have been involved, both because he was out of school yesterday and because he had been making a volcano. This is total nonsense. What happened yesterday was entirely Billy's fault. Let this be a lesson to the rest of you not to play with matches." Furrowing his brow, Mr. Becker walked between the desks until he reached the one where Arnie Markle sat. Leaning over Arnie, he said, "I understand that you were good friends with Billy, that you almost idolized him." Arnie nodded, uncertain of what to say. The Mr. Becker android shook his head sadly. "You must be a very sick and troubled boy. I would suggest that you get counseling immediately. Otherwise, it is likely that you will end up in the same reform school where we have been forced to send Billy." Arnie turned white. "Furthermore," said the Mr. Becker android, turning back to the front of the room, "it should be clear that Wednesday's playground incident, the one in which this young man broke his hand, was entirely the fault of himself and my son, and that Rod Albright is completely blameless in the matter. I have already spoken to Mr. Markle and made it clear that Billy has made a statement absolving Rod of all blame. This will be filed with the police." Turning back to Arnie, he added, "Your father has dropped the lawsuit. I do not think that I would want to be you this afternoon." Arnie groaned and slid down in his seat. Turning to me, Mr. Becker winked. Then he strode out of the room. That afternoon, the twins and I went out to Seldom Seen to say goodbye to the aliens. This was the bad part of the day. To my astonishment, I realized that I didn't want them to go. They were full-size again, which is to say they stood slightly higher than my navel, my belly button. "This is fairly standard size throughout most of the galaxy," Madame Pong had told me the night before. "It is one reason that BKR disguised himself as a child on your planet. It was the only way to fit in among people who have this odd tendency toward giantism." I had remembered the time that Snout started to say it could also have something to do with his stat, and Gracker had cut him off. Now I understood that he had been about to say stature. Gracker hadn't wanted me to know their actual size because he felt that it would make them vulnerable. Tar Gibbons was the first to say farewell. Stretching its neck so that it could lean its head on my shoulder, it said, "This is a sad parting for me, young Rod Albright. I honor the warrior spirit within you and wish that you could travel the stars with us." "Thank you, Tar Gibbons," I said. "I have learned much from you already." I didn't add that over half of it made no sense at all. The half that did make sense was terrific. "For someone made of meat, you are a fine being," said Phil, wrapping one of his tendrils around my shoulder. "I almost feel that you could be one of the family." "Really?" I asked in surprise. "Mostly because you're such a nut," said Phil. I still couldn't tell if he was joking or not. "Train your mind," said Snout, reaching up with his long, spindly arms to grasp my shoulders. After he had held me for a moment, he reached into the pocket of his cloak and pulled out a book. "Here, I had the computer run off a copy in your language last night." I took the book. It was titled Secrets of the Mental Masters. "I'll read it carefully," I promised. Madame Pong was next. "Rod, if it were in my power, I would grant you your heart's desire," she said softly. "Do you know my heart's desire?" I asked, my voice equally soft. She nodded. "You want your father." My throat grew thick, but I forced out the words and asked the question I had been avoiding since yesterday. "Was BKR telling the truth? Does he know where my father is?" "I doubt it very much," she said. "You know why he said that, don't you?" I nodded. "To be cruel." In that much, BKR had been successful. I knew I would always wonder if he could really have told me something about my father. Even so, I didn't doubt that I had done the right thing. I think my father would have approved. "Please take this," said Madame Pong, slipping a ring from her pocket. "The stone is from my planet. It is of great value to my heart." I started to protest to try to give it back to her, but she shook her head and said, "It is the mark of a diplomat to accept a gift with grace." Then she bowed and went into the ship. Gracker was last. He came and stood before me, his head no higher than my armpit. He stared at me for a moment, then raised his hand and made a salute. "Well done, Deputy Albright. Well done indeed." Then he boarded the ship with the others. I took the things by the hands and we backed away. With a rumble, the Furkle lifted from the ground. An orange ray shone through one of the FD gizmos and the ship began to shrink. Soon it was the same size it had been when it landed in my paper mache. Suddenly, it shot straight up. In less time than it takes to tell, it disappeared into the sky. I stared after it for a long time. Then, still holding the twins by the hands, I imitated the Furkle and headed for home. Life would be easier without the aliens around. But if I told you I wouldn't miss them, you would know that I was lying. So that's the end of Aliens Ate My Homework. I hope you guys enjoyed it.